Welcome to the Purpose and Profit Club podcast for nonprofit leaders, mission-driven creatives, and social entrepreneurs. Get ready to stop dreaming and start doing. Here, ideas become action. We prioritize purpose and profit. You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the podcast, Mitch Stein. We're in the green room already talking about this, so I had to hit record so we could go ahead and dig in to donor advised funds. First things first, tell us about you and your work at Chariot.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Christina. Hey, everybody. My name is Mitch Stein. I'm the head of strategy here at Chariot. I have been working in and around the nonprofit technology and innovation space for the past 4 years. I previously founded another startup called Pond, which was a marketplace connecting nonprofits with all different kinds of vendors, from software to services, consultants, training, etc. And before that, I was an investment banker in a former life, but had a growing passion for fundraising and doing my own kind of big, large-scale fundraisers in my free time, and wanted to make that my full-time job. So that's why I'm here today.
Amazing. I think we definitely have to set the stage and set the foundation, because many of my listeners, we've thrown around, read about donor advised funds. I've actually heard some people are like, yeah, not for me. I hear a lot of what is that? So I think we have to first define it. What is it? And then we're really going to get who it's for, why. We're going to hear a lot more conversations about donor advised funds if you're not already. So give us the lay of the land.
Totally. And we can take it piece by piece, because there are a lot of things to dig into. But I also don't want people to think this is a super complex and overwhelming topic, because at the core of it, a donor advised fund is just a charitable savings account. So just like people put money aside in a 401k for retirement and get tax benefits for that, or they put money aside in an HSA, a health savings account, for healthcare costs that with a tax benefit, you can do the same thing for your charitable giving. And it's called a donor advised fund, or a DAF is the acronym that you'll be seeing more and more. So people can contribute cash into those accounts, but they can also contribute things like stocks and bonds, or even less liquid like securities and assets, real estate, even like an art collection or something. As long as it can be valued, it can be contributed into a donor advised fund account. You get that tax write-off on the full amount you contributed upfront. And then it can be invested while it's in that account in the market, in different mutual funds or whatever. And so grow with the market over time as you're granting money out of it over time.
Yeah. So it's making me think of, what is the college savings account called? What is that called? I can't think of it. So we have those for our kids, right? So it's we're putting money in there. Yeah.
You're asking the person without kids.
Yeah. So you're putting money in there, and when it's time, they get to use it. But while I'm putting money in there, it's growing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the only difference between maybe something like that and a 401k is you can grant the funds at any time. You don't have to wait to do it by the time you're a certain age, or by X amount of years has passed. You could stick it in there, and then could you grant the funds tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow. And I think another big difference from a 401k is, from 401k, you can take money out of that early and pay a penalty. For a DAF, it's once the money is in there, it can only leave the account to be granted to a nonprofit organization. So I think that's a really important thing that people miss, is all this money goes into DAFs instead of nonprofits. It's not quite right, just because, and we can get into the complaints and issues around them, but just want that to be crystal clear that the only use case of that funds to leave an account is to be donated to charity. It's the only thing you can do with it.
There we go. You can't just stick it in there and be like, you know what, I want to go on a trip next month. Let me pull that back out.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. All right. Big question. Is this only for wealthy people? Is this just for rich people that their financial advisor is saying, hey, you need to do this?
Yep. I think if we would have been having this conversation 15 years ago, the answer probably would have been yeah, for the most part, people are opting to set up a DAF as a simplified foundation. And that's how I think people thought about it for a long time. And that still happens. And it still is a growing trend that people are opting to use a DAF instead of a private foundation, because all of the administrative operational stuff is managed by the DAF sponsor. So that could be a Fidelity or Vanguard if it's with a financial institution. That can be your local community foundation, or a religious affiliated foundation like National Christian Foundation or Jewish Communal Fund. But When you have your own private foundation that you're making grants out of, you have to have a board. You have to have board meetings. You have to do your filings. You have to do all this stuff. You do none of that for a DAF. It's all managed by the DAF, and you just get to make the grant requests.
And the benefit to investing, let's just use some round numbers today. So if you want to stick $10,000 in a DAF, the benefit to doing that is because it's going to grow, right? Versus let me just give an organization $5,000 this year, $5,000 next year, is that I see my money grow, bear interest, compound, et cetera. That's one primary benefit, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, the benefits, it kind of depends on who's using it. And I think that gets to your earlier question of like, is this just for rich people or the super wealthy? Because yes, another one of those benefits for like a super wealthy person is that if you've got appreciated stock, for example, like if you've been the founder of a company and it's grown a lot and you IPO'd, and so you have all this like really valuable stock, but it's appreciated a ton. So you have capital gains tax that you owe on it. If you donate a portion of that into a donor advised fund, you avoid any of that capital gains you owe, and you get the full write-off on that donation amount that same tax year when you have this big sale. So it's really about like smart tax planning in those instances. So there's definitely that like financial benefit for that larger market. But I want to get to the second part of your question about like, well, what about everyone else? So there's over 3 million people using a DAF. That's the data as of like the end of 2022. So I suspect it's even larger today. And so that tells you that it's not just like the ultra wealthy, that there's also a lot of people that are using this just for like accountable and proactive philanthropy. And what I mean by that is like, I, for example, am not a billionaire, and I get to use a DAF because it's an employee benefit at my company. So I automatically donate $100 a month into my DAF, and my employer matches that $100 a month. So I'm automatically, I've separated the psychology of giving, right? Because there's always two decisions being made whenever you make a gift. Whenever you're solicited, you're making two decisions at the same time, even if you're not totally conscious of it. You're deciding, how much money can I part with? What's my budget? Then do I want it to go to this organization? And do I want to allocate it to them? When you're putting your money in advance aside in a DAF, you're deciding, I want to give $1,200 minimum to charity this year. So I'm going to do $100 a month. And I've taken out any question about it. It's automatic. I'm not waiting to be asked. I'm automatically doing it. And then whenever I'm ready to give, or I get asked by a friend, or I'm going to a charity event like I am tomorrow, I'm like, I can make a twice as big of a gift. And I sort of have this pool of funds to do that from.
That's right.
And so I think that's like the more common use case today from people is like a charitable wallet. It's like, this is just what I do all my giving out of, and it holds me accountable.
Okay. Yes. And we're going to go back to like the 401k example, the college savings, whatever the heck it's called example, which is I've decided ahead of time, this is how much we're investing per month for this. And it takes the guesswork out of what I want to invest towards these goals versus having to think about it every time. So I love that analogy is like, it's like, okay, zooming out, what are my goals? Like, what are my charitable goals? What do I want to, and instead of just doing it like one piece at a time, I'm doing it this way. The other thing you brought up that I was like, I think maybe because I'm in Atlanta, there's so many startups, and boy, are stock options very, very, very common. And to answer my own question of like, yeah, there are a lot of people who are in a situation you just said, where they would have a ton of capital gains taxes to have to deal with, who are not wealthy yet. And what a great way to like check two boxes off of just like being able to give. So I'm seeing it more as like a forward thinking, smart way of like you said, like a charitable wallet. And I wrote down before we started in all caps, friction, because friction is one of the words that my audience knows. We talk about friction a lot of like, can I donate from my couch? Do I have to get up? Do I have to do anything? Because if I have to go find my credit card, if I have to go find my password, you've lost me. And if you've lost me, you've lost people who are 20 years younger than me for sure. And I think what Chariot does really well is it answers the friction problem. So I want to talk about friction, and then we're going to move into some of the common challenges and common like maybe myths about DAFs.
Yeah. And I think even before we get to friction, I'll just bring up like the biggest issue with DAFs that people complain about, I would say, is the fact that there's $230 billion sitting in donor advised funds, these 3 million people's accounts, that is kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting to go to charity. And that's what people get frustrated by. And so I think there's multiple answers. It's a huge problem, right? Like we have so many urgent crises that need to be dealt with yesterday, that need more funding, especially in an environment where donor participation has been declining overall for decades. So like we need this money in the market right now, helping organizations. There's a lot of things that have been proposed on the regulatory side because there's also no required payout for DAFs. So unlike foundations who have that 5% per year payout, DAFs technically don't have a time limit. In practice, the payout ratio of like how much of the total assets each year are given out has been over 20% since they started tracking it like almost 20 years ago. Okay. But that varies a ton between different types of DAFs or different accounts. So one of the questions to ask is like, okay, well, why is this happening from a user experience perspective? Which is what you're bringing up around friction. So like, how hard is it for me to use my DAF? And that's the core reason that Chariot started. And for context, Chariot helps nonprofits get more from donor advised funds by enabling easy 3-click DAF giving right on your website, in your donation forms, wherever donors want to give. And where that stemmed from was, it's actually a very cool story about our founders that they made a commitment to give 10% of their income to charity. So they were in that camp of like, I want accountability, help me, give me a tool to manage that. So they set up special savings accounts with debit cards called My 10%. And it was like kind of a thing, that project they're doing on the side with some friends. And someone that they reached with this project was like, you're kind of setting up a DAF, but without the tax benefits. So they were like, oh, cool. Like, let's all open DAF accounts. So they opened DAF accounts. And then the next time they wanted to use it, their friend was like, hey, I'm running this 5K. Can you donate? And they're like, oh, no, wait, I can't use it on your campaign page. I have to go log into my account, look up the organization, try to track down who the actual fundraiser is. And there's like 25 extra steps and all these redirects. And so they were like, oh, this is why people aren't using staff accounts as much, is they're not usable. And that's the friction point.
Yeah, we've lost Christina. She can't make this from the couch. I can no longer support your 5K. And that's the big disconnect, because it is maddening that much money is sitting right here. We don't even need to fundraise for it. It's here. And how do we get it there to the people? So I think that's the first friction point. And one of the pieces that we talked about previously was like my theory of does the donor, the person with the DAF, think that once they put it in the DAF, they're done? Of like, is there, because they got the tax benefit that year. So if I put money in a DAF yesterday, that's going on my tax next, for the year. And do I think, is there a certain portion that's like, did it, and I sort of forgot, right? And there's a passiveness, and almost like you would invest in a Roth or you would in a 401k, like, oh, I did it. And how do we, if that is so, how do we like turn that around? How do we,
Yeah, it's a really smart observation, because again, from a product perspective, so looking at it from the what does the user experience in the product look like? The most people have their DAF accounts where they have their brokerage and savings accounts. Yep. Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard. Yeah. The product experience is the exact same. So it's set up to, your savings account from, as a user experience perspective, is set up for you to see it increasing.
It's set up for set it and forget it. As somebody with a Vanguard account, that's what it's set up for.
Yeah. So that when you're sending the donor into their DAF account to make their gifts and stuff, it's like you're sending them through a user flow that's designed for them to want to see that account increase instead of decrease. So yes, I think like that contributes to it. And the lack of usability, I also think causes this, and the lack of like familiarity and awareness on the nonprofit side, because if they're not bringing up DAFs in conversation, and putting it on their websites and like really reminding people, then it is really easy to kind of set it and forget it that you have it all there.
I remember there was a fundraising tool, and I'm not sure which one, maybe a year or two ago, that was like, we now accept donor advice funds. And I was like, cool. And I remember many people were like, okay, like no one knew really what that meant. And so and that's part of why I think we really need to have this conversation, because when there is, I'm looking at your website, $230 billion sitting here, that's a conversation worth having. I think the next layer is what organizations on size, on like what type of organization should say, let me prioritize making sure that we are making this as frictionless as possible, but also that we're just talking about donor advised funds and accepting them. Like what kind of organization should prioritize that now?
It's a great question. I mean, a DAF can donate to any 501c3 organization. So it's not like there's a restriction. Anyone can benefit from this. I think it just goes along the lines of like how far along you are in your individual donor base building, because you probably have DAF donors already. And they're probably just giving with a credit card because it's easier. And that's a psychology. To your point about like, are people just setting it there and forgetting it? Sure. I am sure that happens. I've had conversations with people who are like sold a business a few years ago. And I think the exact quote was like, oh yeah, I put some money in a DAF. I should check on, like they hadn't looked at it in a few years. And you're like, but by and large, like I'll get back to the point raised earlier, you can only use this money to donate to charity. So yes, a component of setting it up was probably optimizing a tax burden, but you are also a philanthropist. Like you also, like you want to give, you want to be engaged in your philanthropy.
That's right. But you made that choice and now you did it. So like, let's use it.
Totally. Yeah. And the overall numbers certainly support that as well. Like Fidelity, the largest DAF in the country, discloses really great data. And their average gift size from their DAF account holders is almost $5,000. And the average account holder is making 12 gifts per year. So you compare those numbers to the average line credit card donor is making 2 gifts per year, and they're worth about $200. So these are like significantly more engaged and larger donors, more generous and just more engaged with their philanthropy. But the caveat to that is in all the donor interviews we've done in developing the product, we always ask, do you make gifts with your credit card still? And every 100% of them say yes. So we have this image in our mind, like DAF donors are just these like super wealthy people that are like calling their financial advisor. They don't interact digitally. They're not on our website. It's just not true. And the reason is like too many people have this mindset that they're like their DAF is for like their big 5 or 6 figure gifts that they're going to make near the end of the year to their 4 or 5 like chosen primary organizations. And they use their credit card to donate when they get hit up for a bike ride or, you know, a local campaign or whatever. And people always say it's just because it's easier. But that individual is behaving with that like charitable wallet mindset. And the more that you're putting that in front of them, you can discover who amongst your donors has a DAF by giving them that easy option.
Hey, Changemaker, the Purpose and Profit Club coaching program is open now and you can save $1,000 for a limited time. Now, I'm running Outreach Genius live during the month of May. This is my prospecting and outreach sprint. We've had organizations upgrade donors and get $125,000 gifts after one session of this program. We've had organizations boldly ask for more, boldly prospect, cultivate brand new revenue streams, whether it's partners, sponsors, ambassadors, or individual donors. You need to be inside. If you want more information, go to splendidcourses.com/club. We just really, I think one of the most exciting things about this is I know you'll feel me on this, but our sector really needs to think about Gen Z, millennials, and really like, how are we cultivating? How are we, you know, having conversations with them? And as you're describing this process, it's making me think of if anyone has ever had Venmo and you've got money in your Venmo account, right? So if I am Venmoing somebody, or this happened to me this past weekend, I went to an estate sale, they take Venmo. I'm now going, I've got my Venmo money and my fund money in my wallet, my threshold of what I'm going to spend is totally different than if I was going to take it out of my checking account or look and see how much cash I had. AKA, Christina's going to spend more because I've got fun money. And it's like when your charitable money is not only in a DAF, but it's growing. That's fun. And I really think that speaks to somebody who's excited about truly making a change and like seeing their community, the world, whatever mission they're really, really passionate about better than it was, when it started. And I feel like that's kind of a really fun way for people to think about charitable giving that we really haven't before, of like, you're investing in this. You're told you got an HSA. You're told you need this. Amazing. Try this. And then also I would bet, and it sounds like you have the data now you shared to back it up. People give more.
Mm-hmm.
People give more.
Yeah. One of the coolest things we've seen so far with a large peer-to-peer bike event that we're supporting, and they have DAF Pay as a checkout option on their payment forms. And in the first 3 quarters of the year, they got 332 distinct donor advised fund donations. Average size was $650 and the median size was $250. So to your question of like, are these just for the ultra rich? I mean, those are still nice, like good size gifts to be getting,
yes.
But it's not like, this just to me proves that when given the option, people with DAFs want to use it like that charitable wallet, still making larger gifts, but also giving your organization the best signal possible that they are a good prospect for a major principal gift donor, because there's likely more where that came from. And so like, listen, for a really large organization, I would say like being more engaged with DAF fundraising is critical. Like drop everything. If you're not presenting this to donors, you are 100% missing out. Because if you have a large donor database, there are absolutely DAF donors in there that you're underserving.
Let's define large, because I feel like that can be, very subjective. What's your version?
So I guess I brought that up to say it's critical for someone that's large, but I think the secondary part of that is like, no matter where you are, you're not losing anything to bring up donor advised funds, to have something on your website about it, to make it easy for people. I mean, I would define large as like, if you're raising like 10 plus million a year in contributions, that this is like, it's a yesterday priority, I think. But those numbers are so hard.
If you're raising 10 plus million, or even in the millions, mid millions, that's when we see the, like, if you'd like to donate, and it's like written on their website. It's like, it's friction. And so I totally agree. And one of the things that you said earlier that I 100% am with you and believe in is there are people right now in your donor base that have DAFs, period, full stop. And like for everyone to let that sink in, because again, 230 billion sitting in these DAFs. So for me, the marketer in me, the storyteller in me is like, let's go tell some stories. Let's go write some emails of, hey, you might have forgotten about your DAF. Totally fine. Here's what it is. Here's how you can support our organization. Like telling some stories about reminding people what it is, reminding people that they have it, reminding that your organization takes them, right? And so starting to bridge that gap, and also so that people, when they think of you, they're like, oh, I don't have to give by credit card. I don't need to mail a check, right?
Yes, absolutely. And just some more data that we're already seeing from some of the customers we work with. There's a very large organization that's probably one of the largest databases of individual donors in the country, and they track that data really, really well. And so they track who has a donor advised fund in their database, like based on who's given from it. And one of the interesting things they've looked at is who from our current DAF donors that we know of gave first to us with a credit card. And it's over 60% of their current DAF donors first donated with a credit card. So to your point, it's like, how can we do a better job of encouraging even a first-time donor to see, oh, it's easy to give with a DAF? I mean, that's what Chariot is trying to do for folks, is just make it like a part of the product experience.
That's right.
But even short of that, like, you can do that in your communications. You can do that in your website.
You can stick that in a PS of just like, this is here. If you've got it, boom. You know, it's reminding me too of like for HSAs, there was a movement, and I think I see it always at the end of the year where it's like, did you know if you still have HSA money, you can buy this, this, and this? And it's like vitamin companies, other outside of like traditional medical expenses, educating the public, you can buy this with that. And it's our job as the nonprofit to say, you can do this with that. If you have this, we're going to make it seamless. We're going to make it easy. We're going to make it an experience that, again, you're from your couch, you're on your phone. It's very, very easy. So we've been talking a lot about what excites me about the sector really is just like, we are innovating, which is the most exciting thing that I see in the nonprofit sector. When we talk about innovation, I'm like, yes, I don't want to do it the way that we did it 20 years ago. I don't want to do it the way that we did that's in some dusty book, like forward thinking. So to that point, I want you to like dream a little with me and tell me about some maybe exciting shifts you've seen in the sector or what you would like to see change in this sector.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, specifically related, so we can start with the donor advised fund topic. This is what we've already been chatting about. But I think DAFs, there's 60 million people with 401ks, and there's 3 million people with donor advised funds. I don't see any reason why those numbers couldn't be pretty close together. Like there's more than 60 million people that are donating to charity every year. And I think for all those reasons we mentioned of like, they give more, they make larger gifts, they're more intentional. Like those are all good things. And I think you even opened up with a question, like I've heard from some people that they're not interested from the fundraising side, the nonprofit. They're like, I don't do DAFs. You don't have a choice. Like that's like saying I don't take cash. Like this is how people want to give and are going to give, and you'll get a check mailed to you. You don't have a choice about it.
I got an eye roll in advance of this very recently from an ED who was like, ugh, DAFs.
Yeah.
And what is that? Translate that in layman's terms.
Of course. I was just at the AFP Icon Conference. It's like the largest fundraising conference in the world. And I always, I don't just like launch into talking about Chariot. I always say like, are you familiar with donor advised funds? And I almost always get a, and I'm like, I go into therapist mode. I'm like, tell me more. Let's unpack that. Because I want to know like where they're starting from.
Let's do some inner child work. What did DAFs do to you?
What did they do to you? So it's always two things. One is the the kind of macro frustration that there's all this money there.
Totally.
There's but then it's like a huge operational frustration because they're like, whenever we get this gift, it can be anonymous. Like they'll always say it's the anonymous giving, but you need to unpack that a little bit because less than 4% of DAF gifts are truly made anonymous. Like you have no idea. It just came from Fidelity and you get any other information. Most of the time you get information, it's not useful. It'll be like
that's right.
A PO box mailing address and the name of the fund, which could be like the Dog and Pony Fund. Like it can be anything. Or it'll be like the Smith Family Fund. And you're like, I've got 400 Smith families in my database. What do I do with that?
Right.
So it's the not useful information that is really frustrating to people. And I think that's where that comes from and what that means.
Does Chariot remove that part? Because I'm thinking of another ED who said to me last year, the good news is we got $75,000. The bad news is I literally don't know from where beyond what you just said. You basically just described her entire experience.
Yeah. So yes, whenever someone is making a DAF gift through the DAF Pay button, you're capturing their name and email right there. So you have it immediately. And the other problem is like these things are typically sent through the mail. They get lost. Then a donor gets frustrated and you don't even know that they made a gift because it's just initiated through their own portal. So when you bring that all into your own domain and your own website, you're solving a lot of those problems. We can't guarantee that donors won't still go through their portal, but you're at least moving donors over to this easier process where you capture name, email, and gift size immediately so you can immediately thank them. And we ran an experiment with the Michael J. Fox Foundation when they implemented DAF Pay on their Ways to Give page. And they got, in 2 months, they got 15 net new DAF donors. Their average gift size was about $2,000. But they also emailed them all, pretty shortly thereafter, like as soon as they could get to it, within a few hours. And they had over 50% of those new DAF donors respond to their thank you email, which they're like, that is unheard of for a thank
That's
you
right.
email, because they were like shocked that they actually heard back. Because it's also a bad experience from the donor. It's not just the nonprofit. They're also like, I made this gift from my Fidelity account, and I never even heard from them.
Yes. And we have to, like, before we're totally salty about something and completely write it off, we have to think about, like, what was their experience like, right? They didn't know that it basically came to you anonymously or semi-anonymously. And so, yeah, what do you say to people, organizations, leadership who are like a little tech adverse? Because this is a tech tool. Mm-hmm. This is very forward thinking. This is end to end. Like you said, like the goal for me is always, again, I'm using the couch analogy of like, do I have to find the logins? And so I'm having anyone who's like, oh, but then my donor has to trust this third party. What do you say to any resistance around tech, around investing in tech tools? That's another one that drives me bananas. What do you say to all that?
Yeah, so I'll split in two parts, because I do think like security is obviously like the single most important thing to you and your donor. And the way when you go through the DAF Pay button, you're logging in to your Fidelity account with your Fidelity credentials. We don't store those. We work with some of the largest hospital systems and nonprofits in the country. We've gone through like the ringer of security review and all these different things. Like we are also highly focused on that. And so it's extremely secure from a donor privacy and security perspective. And I think that there's another tool some people might be familiar with it called Plaid, which has been around for like a decade. And that's where you as an individual consumer can log into other products with your bank account credentials. We're doing something very similar. And I think that DAF donors took to it quickly because they're used to doing that in other settings. They understand the process. And I also think that it being on, they're seeing their DAF name and brand, and they're seeing your nonprofit's name and brand is giving them a lot of confidence as well. We do have some DAF donors that reach out and say, like, I've never heard of this. How does this work? And they do want some extra reassurance because we're on the beginning of that adoption curve.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because before Plaid, okay, there were probably some other ones, but how many times now have we done a handshake with Plaid and we don't even remember it? For example, QuickBooks. If you use QuickBooks in your life, it's probably back end, I want to say it's Plaid, or connecting straight to something. And so if you have the belief like, oh, I don't know if my donors are going to like this, or, oh, the new tech, whether it's Chariot or another just fundraising tool, which is sometimes what I'm on the receiving end of, like, think about how often your donors have already done this in a million different ways. Setting up a Venmo account, a Zelle account, like all of these different backend things that are now 10 years ago may have felt very like, ooh, should I give away my credentials? Now we're like, here, go forth, connect, make my life quicker, faster, easier.
Yeah. And I'll use some Fidelity data again, just because they're the largest and they provide the most robust data. I think it's like 97% of their DAF gifts are made online, or their donors are using their online tools. Like these people are online individuals, even though the age does skew older for donor advised funds. They're used to being online. And so, yeah, I think that's another misunderstanding. People have this visual of like a super elderly person like calling their financial advisor. Yeah, that still might happen, especially for someone that's like a literal billionaire. Like they're probably might not be doing as much, but in general, people are online. And I just wanted to answer your second part of that question, which was making the actual investment. I think it's a little bit easier for us because it's so clear. Like if I convert one DAF donor, this could be like tens of thousands of dollars in benefits. So there's like this top line revenue results and ROI that I think is much easier for people to point to. But behind that, I mean, the operational benefits, I argue, are even bigger than some of those top line benefits. It's typically a harder sale, so I don't even try to emphasize it as much. But just thinking about all the effort people go to like calling the community foundation, who is this donor? Can you tell me who it is? Yes. Back and forth touch points with a major donor to see if they submitted their gift. That's not what you want to be talking to them about. Like that friction, back and forth. Did you submit it? Where did you submit it? Did you use the right EIN? Did you give a different designation? What was the name of your fund? Yeah. Like you want it to be immediate and done, and then talk to them about your mission. And like, that's hard to put a price tag on. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Is there anything about donor advice funds that you wanted to make sure we talked about that we haven't?
I mean, I I guess this is also to your question about like where things are going or what the future will
Yeah.
be. I have a I'm very passionate about changing corporate matching because I have now
Okay.
had two experiences where I've been at a super big company that did old school
Yeah.
corporate matches, which involved me making a gift to like the local LGBT community center, and then
Yep.
me needing to go log into a system that looked like it was from like built on an Atari game system in the 80s, and like having to have the exact legal name of the organization to find it,
Yep.
going through all these extra steps, waiting weeks, them getting a check, trying to match it up to it. Like the operational burden on both the company and the nonprofit and the donor to me is wild. And now
Yeah.
being in a company where we use a DAF as an employee benefit instead of individual gift matching, I'm like, this is the future because the user experience
Yes.
instead is I automatically put money into my DAF and my company automatically matches that. There's no diligence. They're not vetting individual gifts. I don't submit anything. I just have twice as much money to give away to charity. So the charity doesn't need to connect a matching gift to me,
So fun.
ask you to make, are you sure you don't get a corporate match for this? Can you go do this extra work? Like it's so much better for everyone that I'm like, when will people see the light and start using DAFs as an employee benefit?
I think it's happening. The more we talk about it, it's happening. And what a great add value in the corporate world. And I'm sure whoever's in charge of doing it the old school way will be your biggest evangelist fan of like, please, let's do it this way instead. Totally.
Yeah. I mean, we don't offer that. Like we're just the payment facilitator. Yes. But I have had so many, I'm such a like advocate for it. And I talk about it a lot on LinkedIn. I've probably sent like, we use a company called Daffy that does this, but there's several. There's, I think, Common Good, Groundswell, Charity Vest.
Yep.
They all manage similar programs like this. So I'm like, if you want to recommend this to someone, I cannot say enough good things about how good it is.
Amazing. Oh, I love that. Well, we ask every guest on the podcast, what is one thought they like to think on purpose? So this can be a guiding thought, a mantra, an affirmation. Would you share yours with our audience?
Yeah, I guess I don't know that I had these specific words before, but I think about this concept a lot. And then I was just at this conference before we had this conversation. And I don't know if folks are familiar with Mallory Erickson, who's another.
We love her. Yes.
You love her.
Yes.
Great. Another podcast host and awesome voice in our sector.
Totally.
And she came up and gave me a gift, which was the Nonprofit Fundraisers Coloring Book.
Yes.
Which was like beautifully designed pages that had little mantras on them. And I'm flipping through and I saw one and I was like, this needs to be on a billboard. And I think about this all the time, but it just said, don't be for everybody. And I was like, yes, that I think, particularly in the nonprofit sector, we're so used to being people pleasers and like, oh, we can't upset the donor, or we can, you're like worried about what other people think. And it's hard not to be. You're trying to live up to some expectation and the power imbalance is all off. And there's so many problems that I think can prevent people from really embracing who they are and understanding that you need to lead with that. And that's how you deeply connect with the right people, by showing up as who you are, being vulnerable. And I have too many examples to count of times that I've like shared out a problem I'm having or a realization I had, and someone reaching out to me like, this truly changed my day, my week, my life. Thank you for sharing that. Here's where like my experience has been. And I just every time I do that, it's like reiterating to me, like, just never back away from who I am and what I care about. And anyone who has a problem with that is someone that I don't want to be engaging with anyway. And the world is too big and there's too many amazing people out there to worry about someone that's going to have a problem with me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's when you water yourself down and try and be for everybody, which is tempting. It's tempting individually, personally. It's tempting as an organization, because then we'll sweep up more donors, right? You actually end up just being kind of watered down and not really attracting your people, to your point. And it takes more courage to not be for everybody And that is where the impact is. That is where the growth is. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
I think there's a part two of that, because I always want to make sure I call out that also some people don't necessarily always have the safety to feel like they truly can be themselves. Yes. And so I think there's definitely a lot of privilege in where you are in your career to be able to do that. What different layers of your identity that you may feel more or less comfortable or uncomfortable with. And so I think folks who do have some of that privilege to show up more authentically and be themselves is to like make that space for other people too, and be like proactive about giving people permission to show up as themselves. And when you're in management positions or have an audience, like you have to do more than just say like, be yourself, because it is definitely easier for some folks than others. 100%. And so it's be yourself and make space for others to be themselves.
And how are you creating seats at the table for people who should be at the table and aren't yet? And that's part of our work in the sector for sure. How can people connect with you? Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been beautiful.
Of course. You can find me on LinkedIn. I spend way too much time there, but it's my favorite. It's my like only social media, and I really love it. But yeah, definitely let's connect and reach out there if you've got questions about DAFs in general or want to learn more about Chariot. That's definitely an easy place to find me. Or if you want to shoot me an email, I'm just at mitch@givechariot.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, high achiever. I know your sights are set on ambitious, world-changing goals. In the Purpose and Profit Club group coaching program, you can get the support, motivation, and strategy to accelerate your impact. I like to say it's where the inner work meets big impact and big funding. Go to splendidcourses.com/waitlist, and you will be first to be notified when we open up doors, and you'll get special bonuses when you join our waitlist. See you inside. Think you've reached out to everyone in your network? Are you out of ideas to get noticed and get funded? I hear you. That's why I'm giving you a chance to steal my prospect list. Yes, you can generate leads for your nonprofit or impact-driven business. Grab my mini training and list delivered to your inbox instantly. Go to splendidcourses.com/prospect.